Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1420.
Good morning, Rabbi.
1420, and we are middle of discussing a really powerful analogy of the Alter Rebbe. One of the chidushim, one of the innovations of the Alter Rebbe is explaining the 10 hidden spheres. And I'll just elaborate a bit more. It may be helpful here. The 10 hidden spheres were the example of calling someone by a name or by name. So, a little background that will help us understand what we've learned. The 10 spheres, as the Sefiros says, that God created existence, He created 10 spheres. 10 spheres are 10. You can call them 10 instruments, 10 tools, 10 attributes. These are like 10 building blocks, which reflect 10 divine manifestations. And we know what they are. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. And they, of course, in turn, break down into more details. There's the Chachma, Sheba, Chachma, and Bina, Sheba, Chachma. So it's 10 times 10, which is 100. And then 100 times 10 is 1,000. When we count the Omer, for example, beginning the second day of Passover, the second night of Passover, we count 7 times 7 days, 49 days, each one of the 7 emotions of the 10 spheres. So the spheres are essentially, like we say, they're Saramai Maris Nivra, that with 10 statements God created the world. Those evolve from the 10 commandments, which evolve in turn from the 10 spheres. So the 10 spheres are fundamental channels of divine expression. And that's what allows for existence to have a structure. But obviously, like we say in Pasuk Eliyahu every Friday, from Tikkunei Zeyar, it says, Lav inun midas hiu klal. God is beyond any form of parameters or definitions or midas as measurements or attributes. But that's Achdus Apshuta, God's shapeless and seamless unity. But as we said, Kol Yachol, God has the power and wants to create an existence with structure. The spheres play a tremendous role in that. Now, the way the spheres are shaped, that's the process of first God envisioning the 10 spheres, then the Tzimtzum concealing the energy so they can emerge, the Kav, which actually shapes these spheres and brings them into being, and then the spheres evolve from each world, Odam Kadmon, Akudim, 10 energies in one container, then the Kudim, 10 energies in 10 containers, but there's a tension and a disparity and a dissonance there. And then in Tikkun and Atzilus, they become Vrudim, they become balanced, a harmony between the 10 energies in the 10 containers, and that continues to evolve, Briya, Yetzir, Asiya, until the human being in this earth, like he says in Tanya, are 10 faculties. Evolve from these 10 spheres. So they play a central role in the whole understanding of the cosmic understanding of the way God creates existence and God runs existence is through these spheres. But there are different opinions, and Kabbalah is a long discussion what the spheres are exactly. Are they divine? Are they divine instruments? Are they creations? And obviously we don't pray to the spheres, God forbid, even though God has attributes. We say, L'cha Hashem Agdula, God is great. God is chesed. God has gibur, he's strong. God is compassionate. God is wise. But those are attributes. Those attributes associate with the essence. And we're praying to the essence, but the way we pray is how that connects, how the essence manifests itself in this structure. In Tanya chapter 2 and several other places, he talks about this. Then we talk about Chochmah, God's wisdom, it's one with him. And he explains there that there's the famous disagreement with the Maral. The Rambam says that God is one with his knowledge. And Maral says God is higher than knowledge. And Chassidus and Arizal reconcile, Kabbalah and Chassidus reconcile, that the divine on its own is above it. That's what the Maral is speaking about. But then he chooses in the spheres of Atzilus, like he brings from the Ramak and the Arizal, he chooses to manifest and become one with these attributes. So here's not the place to go through all the opinions. Is it divine? Does it have particles? There's opinion that the Sefiros are really the Kalim. There's opinion that the Sefiros are the Oiris, the energies. There's opinion they're both. We've discussed this many times earlier, especially in the early parts of Ayin Beis. What's relevant here is that these spheres are rooted all the way before the Tzimtzum on what is called the 10 hidden spheres. But the 10 hidden spheres actually, in Kabbalah, the Rebbe has a very interesting footnote in the Sefer Mamorim Tafshin Ches, where he brings that there are different examples given for the hidden spheres because they refer to different levels. The hidden spheres could be referred to, like we learned yesterday, in Ak. He also calls it hidden spheres, but compared to Atzilus, they're still hidden. Think of the human faculties. Our faculties that are revealed are first hidden faculties, and then they're hidden even more so, all the way back to the Etzem HaNefesh in the very soul. Like we learned earlier, there are letters, not just in expression in written letters. There's letters of speech, and there's letters of thought, and there's letters in Keser, in Rotzen and Tainug, and there's letters all the way in the Etzem HaNefesh. Except there, they don't have a shape of letters. So the spheres, as they're revealed, have a definition. Chochmah, Bina, Das, Eiris, and Kalim, energy and containers. But how are they in their higher levels? How do we relate to them? Because remember, these are the spheres that help us, help the divine connect to us, to existence. That's how God creates existence, through that structure. So, for example, Oir is connected to Chesed. Water is connected to Chesed. Fire is connected to Gvura. So everything in this existence has its roots in the spheres. But you want also, and that's how we connect to God, to the divine. So these spheres are essentially the building blocks that we can use as stepping stones. So we go from Asiya to the 10 spheres in Asiya, to the 10 spheres of Yetzirah, to the 10 spheres of Bria, to the 10 spheres of Atzilus, and higher to the 10 spheres of Ak, all the way to the 10 spheres as they're in the hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum. So there are different examples given for these hidden spheres as they are in the higher levels. One example is actually like the flame within a coal. Another example is like the tzura chalomish, like the sparks within a flintstone. The Rebbe in that footnote explains that they're both examples. Each one is focusing on a different element. If you want to understand the connection between revealed spheres and hidden spheres, so the flame within the coal is the best example, because the flame within the coal is connected to the flame outside the coal, which is like the revealed spheres. If you want to understand the abstraction and the subtlety and the sublime nature of the hidden spheres, the sparks within the flintstone are a better example because they don't have substance yet. But then there's even the highest example of all is the example of Shemus, the one he brings here from Torah Eir Vayechi in the Esophagus. And what is that? That it's not even like a spark in a flintstone. It's like when you call someone by name, the name, before you call them by name, that attribute was not there at all. In a human being, it's concealed at least, but in the divine, it's not even concealed. But then God then, however, created names and said, with these names you call me, and these names will draw forth that attribute that you're calling me by that name. So it's obviously the divine as it manifests already in these attributes. And in the names themselves, we learn there's two levels. There's Shem Echad, just God's name, Shmei HaGadol. Just the fact that he has a name without getting into details. So that tells us, like he said, that God is now manifested at least in a form that you can relate to the name. So there's some expression, some but that's still an that's beyond, that's not yet envisioning the details of the structure of existence, the details of the 10 spheres. And then come the Shemus Pratim, the specific names like Chochem, Chesed, Chazdan. That God is a Chochem, that's Chochmah. God is a Chazdan, that's Chesed. And that's the process here. So names is the example the Alter Rebbe gives to understand the 10 hidden spheres. So they're not even really spheres. They're just, they don't really exist, but the names are able to give them definition. And that's how we understand what he's saying here. So he said, so in Torah 8, he's talking about Ak, that Atzmus of Ak is that level where there's at least the Shmoy Atzmus of Ak is higher than revelation. That's Kadmus HaMaitzil. That's the original, the primordial emanator, which is the beginning of this, the beginning of the structure of Adam Kadmon, and Malchus Avak is the revelation of that Shmoi. That's the name. The name now is giving some handle to the Netzalim, to the emanations, to be able to hold on to. But they originate in the spheres that are not yet conscious. So you have the conscious spheres, and you have the ones that are super conscious beyond that. And from the general concept of a name, that there is now some expression in a name, comes the 7 different midas, the 7 attributes. And the names are, by calling these names, that's how you draw forth these different attributes on that level. Specific names, Anak, even though they're concealed, but they're all in a state of unity because they're all connected on that level. And then from there, they'll come into Atzilus, and that's where they will become and actually have actual structure. So we have here the root of the spheres as they are through these names in their source. He says, Kamoi Kain, we could understand, similarly, we could understand how it is before the Tzimtzum. That B'chinas Shmei HaGadol is the Shmei HaGadol, the great name, is just indicating that there is a Gilim in Ha'atzmus. That now we have the capacity, the potential to have the root of spheres, but we don't yet have specific spheres. But now we have the potential to call the names and draw forth from this one singular name all the specific details. So one singular name that unites them all, and then you can draw from there the specifics. And that's the 2 levels. The level of L'mayla Ma'alei Sharatzin. Before it arose in his desire, it's just Shmei HaGadol, it's just a revelation without any distinctions. And from that Shmei HaGadol come the specific names and reflections that will become the source for the spheres. That's where we stopped. By the words, Ki Hu Yisbarach Kol Yachol, which I'm going to explain now, we're going to learn on. We're going to continue learning. And that's a summary of what we've learned with a little more explanation and background. So now we'll continue. The line begins Hagadol, the middle of, right, around a third of the way down on page 1420, which can be found in pages, if you want to follow the text, PDFs at ayinbeis.com. So he says, and from this great name, meaning the general concept, him and his name, meaning it's not just who, God, that is beyond everything, but there's a shmai, there's already a name, which essentially means a potential form of this expression. And from that, he says, from shmai HaGadol, nimshachu, will extend and be expressed in shemis v'ha'oris, names and reflections, liyismoka l'sfiris, to become the source for the spheres. So an example of the artist, he's not yet an artist, but he's now manifesting at least in the name of an artist, like be called by name. And that will then begin to envision, the artist will begin to envision the art, which is the specific spheres that he's going to manifest in. Okay. And there he adds, Ki Hu Yisbarach Kol Yachol. That's where we stop, but I'm going to continue, you'll see the flow. Because the Eibush is a Kol Yachol. What does that mean? Because you could say, with God, it defies all definitions and expressions. So how is he suddenly manifesting from a unified state that's completely seamless and shapeless? Because he's Kol Yachol. And in his 10 spheres, or in his spheres in general, these reflections, you also have him, his very essence. And he's now going to explain that's because God has the capacity to take all his infinity, like we discussed, and say from infinite possibilities, I'm choosing one, these spheres, but they carry my infinity in them because they're part of my possibilities. Human beings don't begin with infinity. We are limited creatures from the beginning. The only difference is that it's concealed, so we need a name to draw forth from the concealed state to the revealed state. But we're never in a state that's completely beyond definition. Even though relatively the Etzem HaNefesh that we'll soon learn does have an element of shapelessness, but it's still not as much as it is L'mayla. Above there's complete shapelessness, no definitions altogether. But because Kol Yachol, God is saying, he's saying here, that's why God can take from that shapeless and begins with a general name, and first his own awareness of it. So there's consciousness, there's some internal awareness like thought, and that will then ultimately translate into Dibur, expression, where he envisions the actual existence, envisions the spheres, the actual spheres. So we call Yachol. So he's now going to explain with an example from the Medrash how this works. Like it says in Medrash Rabbah, this is in several places. In Bereshis Rabbah, in the beginning, I think chapter 4, I believe, and then later Vayakal Pekudei about the Mishkan. So there's an example in the Medrash, and I'll explain the context in a minute. Let's read. Hamoshel, the example in Medrash of Maris Hagedelis, large mirrors, Umaris Haktanis, and small mirrors. He says, Shenizbayr Le'il. It was discussed earlier. Yes, this was brought quite a few times earlier in Ayin Beis. So let me tell you the Medrash. Medrash is that it says that a heathen, a Gentile, asked one of the Tanoim a question. It's a series of questions actually, but the question that concerns us is this one. He said that he asked the question. It says in the verse that God says, I fill all heaven and earth. And then it says that he speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu in the Mishkan, in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan through the Shnei Badei Ha'arim, from the top, from the cover of the ark, between the two badim, the two handles, the two bars. That's what it says. So which one is it? If God fills all of existence, and now he says he's speaking from a very narrow place, a very limited place. So I think I don't know if it's Rab Meir, it's one of the Tanaim says to him, he gives him an example from the physical world. Bring me large mirrors. So he brings him large mirrors and says, when you look into the large mirror, what do you see? He sees a reflection of himself, but it's a large reflection. Some of the commentaries say it's not just a large mirror, it's also what we call, I think, a concave mirror that actually enlarges the image. Then he says to him, bring me now small mirrors. And some say these small mirrors diminish the image. But either way, it's a smaller image because it's a small mirror. He says, so will you explain to me what's going on here? The same person, when you look in this mirror, you see a large image. You look in this mirror, you see a small image, a small reflection. And that's, as he says, so by human beings, that's that way. That one limited human being can be perceived in two ways based on the mirrors that you're using. Same thing with God. How much more so with God? That the way we perceive him is the God that fills all of existence. And there you see him like in a large mirror. And the same God that's beyond everything can also be seen in a small mirror. And that's when he is speaking to Moshe between. So the same God can take himself and, so to speak, manifest and express himself in a smaller fashion. That's the example from the Medrash. It's a very interesting example because it means it doesn't affect God's unity and God's fundamental shapelessness. It just means that God, because he's called Yachol, he can express himself. There's sometimes the example used, I'm just comparing it, the Rebbe brings it at times, that the entire sun is reflected in one drop of water, just as it's reflected in an entire ocean. So in other words, it's all a matter of how it's reflected and how we perceive it. So based on that, what he's saying is, continue, v'hainu, and this means, that the Eibishter shows and reveals himself as he desires. And he could do it in either way. He could do it in a large mirror, he could do it in a small mirror. As such, this, what we said before, that though God is beyond the structure, and first it's only a shame, one name, but then he chooses to reflect and express himself through the specific names. So from the Shmei HaGadol comes now the source for each of the spheres, Mokar the spheres, and it's all part of that one God that is choosing to manifest in different ways. That's what he brought here. Val derech ze yuvan gam kan. The Rebbe Rashab says, and similarly, we can explain this also here. She'ima yesha er v'aziv hu poshet, that even though the light and the reflection of the divine is poshet, is seamless, shapeless. Poshet means it doesn't have any levels. It's poshet. But tachlis apshitus, with utter shapelessness, l'mayla mayla m'shedish b'chinas asfiris, higher and higher, far, far above of being a root for the actual Sefiros, which is structure, which is not poshet. Because Sefiros chachma is not bina is not das is not chesed. In kol zeh, nevertheless, kisha'olah b'ritzeni is baruch, when it arose in his desire, lahaitzi la'elamis, to emanate the worlds, mamshich umeir harashi is baruch. So the process of how he did that, so he transmitted and radiates his shapeless reflection, be'in in a manner, in a process, that becomes a root and a source for the Sefiros. So here you see, shapeless, but then when he desires, he wants to create a structured existence, or in this case, emanate, Hatzilus. So that desire, that causes that there should be something that will become the root and source of the Sefiros. The root and source. We're not talking about yet actual Sefiros. Because remember, let's go back to the example of the artist. Before he actually creates art, and before he's an artist, he has the capacity, but he has to choose to say, I want to now be an artist. I want to now create art. And then I want to specific type of art. So all this is the levels that are allowing space, giving room in a shapeless, completely shapeless, unified singularity, allowing room for now the manifestation of the beginnings of God envisioning existence, or envisioning the Sefiros, to be more exact. And that's the meaning of the names that he gives himself, that he gives us names to call him by, because what he's doing is saying, you can now reach, because I'm allowing myself to be manifest in a way that you can access me in some structured fashion. That's what he's saying here. And what's the Sheirish Shemokah for the Sefiros? Hainu, Yineshemus Hanimshachim Mibchina Shmei HaGadol. That's the names. Those are the names that are coming. Shmei HaGadol is just a general name, a shapeless name, just the idea that he's being expressed, that he has a name. And from that come the specific names, which is the root and source of the Sefiros. That's what he's explaining here. Now he's going to continue to explain why they like names. Because a name is not quite an identity. A name is just a handle. But he's going to explain now the significance of calling it a name, because a name is like an interface between the shapelessness and actual Sefiros, because it's not Sefiros yet. They're just names. They're just identities. They're like IDs. Is giving their entities that are their definitions, I would say. Definitions before they actually become full-blown entities. But before I continue explaining the names part that he's going to explain, let's stop a moment if anybody has any questions. Because this is pretty high-level chassidus, but it's beautiful, because the Rebbe Rashab, which you're not going to find in other places, really giving us a taste of the dynamics before the Tzimtzum. So this is a nice, it's a preview into higher states of reality that we don't usually are privy to. So it's quite something. But I want to stop if anybody wants any clarity or any questions.
Rabbi Jacobson, I was wondering if this Shem HaGadol that the Rebbe is talking about is what we intend. The Ghana won't say in Kaddish, Hey Shmei Rabbah. Is it going up to that level, Shmei Rabbah in Kaddish, or not?
Maybe. I would wait and see as he comes back. Remember, he started with Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah on page 1416. Yeah, so it could be. I would wait to see how the Rebbe Rashab spells it out. He hasn't finished the subject. We have quite a few pages to go. But we'd have to look ahead if you want to know the answer to that. But I would wait and see how he develops it. Yeah, he's going to say it, I think. Yeah. Because look, he's explaining here, this whole thing is coming to explain what he began on page 3 pages ago. What is Shemai? When you say Hoyo Shemai v'Echad, what is Shemai? So he's in the middle of explaining this level of Shemai, and we'll see. So I'd rather wait before I answer that, because I want to see how the Rebbe Rashab explains it, okay? Yeah.
Rabbi.
Now he's going to explain why it's only names. Ve'hein b'bchinas shemes levad. And this level that we're talking about, with the early Genesis, the early stirrings, you can say in the divine energy pre-Tzimtzum of the structure that will ultimately become the spheres that we know of. He says are only compared to names. They're only like names. What does that mean? V'hainu. The Iyam Mokher Zeh, this source for the spheres, Ein Zeh sheyesh b'chinas spheres mamish behelam. This does not mean that you actually have spheres that are concealed. You know, you could have spheres that are concealed, like we have faculties that are concealed. I have a power in my hand right now, for example, to throw a stone, let's say 100 feet. Even if I'm not actually doing it, the power is there, but it's concealed. And when I actually throw it, it gets revealed. So what he's saying, is that the way it is with the spheres, the hidden spheres before the Tzimtzum? He says no. That's why he calls it names. It's not spheres that are concealed. There are no actual spheres that are concealed. In the outer dimension of Keser that we learned before, which he compared to engraved letters, not through and through, engraved letters, here, Sheyesham b'chinas spheres behelam. There, the spheres are behelam. That's like the superconscious. So there is something there, except it's concealed. Like, for example, the example we gave is engraved letters. There are letters, but they're concealed within the source. That's Ketzenis HaKeser. But we're talking here before the Tzimtzum, or in more specifically in Keser, Primis HaKeser. He doesn't say it explicitly, but it's pretty implicit. So we're not talking about actual spheres. We're talking about potential for spheres. Like he writes in Eitz Chaim, Shar Memal of Pei Gimel, in the Gate 41, chapter 3, that there in the Oyer, there's no dmus, there's no likeness. And spheres, chaz v'shalom, God forbid. So there's no image yet. There's no structure yet. So what is there? Rak. So what is there? Rak sheyesh b'zeh nesinas mokim. There's a potential. God has now allowed space, so to speak, potential, nesinas mokim, to allow the kasher yikru b'shem. He's allowing himself. He's allowing this energy to be subject, that when he'll be called by a name, Chochma v'chochem v'chazdan, he'll be called Chochem, wise one, or Chazdan, kind one. Yeh b'chinas ha'chochma v'achesed behelam. So it's not quite complete shapelessness because it's already manifest in name, and that name is the source for all the names. So it's not quite, but it's also not spheres yet. It's an nesinas mokim. He's allowing himself to be called by name. That when you'll call by name, you'll be able to draw from there the level of Chochmah v'chesed behelam, like in Chetzenius HaKeser concealed, liyas moker lebchinas Chochmah v'chesed. That will become a source for actual Chochmah v'chesed. In other words, it's almost like saying he's leaving room for the superconscious to emerge, that from there, that concealed state will ultimately come the conscious spheres, to use psychological terminology. So we're talking about a state that is not quite even Helam. It's just that he's allowing himself, the sinas mokim, it's a potential, it's a capacity, the ability Without this stage, you wouldn't have the capacity to move from a complete singularity of shapeless and seamless energy to structure. So that's this stage. If you may recall, when we learned in the end of volume 2, he was talking about the levels before the Tzimtzum, Aleisa Rotzen and Rotzen itself, and then we learned in Tzadik Dalet from the Frierdiker Rebbe, there were levels where there was similar concept, where it comes from a place that is not yet even defined, where it starts becoming, he's starting to consider, there was the expression there, consideration, then deliberation, and then determination. The 3 words he used there. So he's giving the consideration, allowing, I'm not saying it's exactly this level, but it has a similarity. He's allowing such space, allowing room for it. The sinas makim. That's the expression he uses here. Very interesting expression. I've not seen it very often in Chassidus. I've heard it when it's where Chassidus is explained, we talk about this level. But here it's actually the Rebbe Rashab is writing it. But it's no surprise in Ayin Beis we do have things that is not written anywhere else. He spells things out more than other places in Chassidus. He's calling it the Nesinas Makim. So what it does is this really addresses that stage, that mysterious stage. How does actual shapelessness become shape? Either shapeless or shapeless. So he's saying because the Eibishter's Kol Yochel and his ability to reflect in small mirrors like large mirrors, that allows. So then he's allowing from a shapeless entity to become a name in general, Shmei HaGadol. That in turn allows room for other names. So in other words, by us, it's a given that I can call you by a name. Why? Because we're defined entities. By God, it's not a given. How did he end up in the name altogether? God is beyond any name. We know Leisram is Lebeshum Eis, Lebeshum Kates. He has no name. A name is a definition. Asmus has no definitions. So he's explaining the process of how definition begins, but it doesn't begin with an actually defined state. It begins, and in a way he wants us to understand it. So even though it's Kol Yochel that God has the power, but it's still in stages. So first it becomes the stage of a general name that will allow for other names, which allows room now that when the names will be called, they will create the possibility, the mucker, the source for definition, the helam, and then ultimately from the helam to the gili. That's what he's saying right now. Very good. Shazehu b'chinas eses sfiras hagnuzis. And this is the level of the 10 hidden spheres. Sheheim b'chinas shemus levad. So we call them 10 hidden spheres, but they're not hidden spheres. They're only names. Now, there are lower levels of hidden spheres, I should mention, that are considered spheres already. I mentioned earlier that you have the hidden spheres in Ak, sometimes Akudim, sometimes in Atik even. As I said, the Rebbe brings this in his footnote in Tov Ches, which part of what I'm explaining is based on that footnote. I can show it to you. Maybe I'll post a picture of it on the group after the class. Okay. So this is the spheres, they're only Shemus Levad based on the Alter Rebbe's explanation in the Torah that he began to explain at the bottom of last page. And on the other hand, being that we're talking about an interface, so yes, so it's only names, not spheres yet, but it's still names plural, because you still want it to have some commonality with the spheres that will ultimately emerge. So he says, Mokim, and even though we just said it's names and not spheres, which is like a potential state, Nesinas Mokim, allowing for it, not just a singular name, it's Shemus in the plural, a number of names. And they're drawn from and extend from Shemei HaGadol, his great name, which is one singular name. So you have now both sides to it. On one hand, it's not completely shapeless because it's become name and even names. On the other hand, it's not yet spheres. So it's only the names that are allowing it to begin to manifest. And from there will actually become the actual reality of the spheres as we continue downward. Now, for all practical purposes, just keep in mind that avodah of this means that when we engage with our faculties in chachma, bina, das, and so on, and we connect through learning Torah or through doing mitzvahs, or in generally aligning our faculties to our divine purpose, what he's really saying is that we have the capacity to reach not just the spheres of Atzilus, not just the hidden spheres in Chetzenius Keser, but we can reach even the names, which in turn reach the singular name, which in turn reaches the Oyer that's higher than names altogether. That's really what the bottom line is. But this is the stepping stones that lead us from the most tangible structures that we have that allow us to retrace the steps all the way back to their origins, where it all originated before the Tzimtzum in this process that he's describing now. That's really the punchline, which we're going to learn about. I just wanted to make it clear that this isn't just it's not just discussing a topic. It actually has real implications of how deep and how we can reach with our defined activities in the world of total, with parameters and definitions and boundaries and everything. It also connects a lot to what we discussed in volume 1, that Sefiros have 3 meanings. We're going to be counting Sefiros Eimer. So Sefira means to count, number, mispar. Mispar is a very defined. 1 is not 2. 2 is not 3. 49 is not 48. Then comes Sipur, like Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're telling a narrative. In a narrative, it's not quite as defined as it is in a number. The number is just a structure. It's made up of 49 parts, or 7 or 10 spheres. The story they tell, the story is a little more sublime than the number. And then there's the third interpretation, Sapir, from the word Evan Sapir, like a sapphire stone, where the spheres become illuminators, transparent, like a luminous stone that transparently reflects that which is higher than existence. And he explained in volume 1 rather, that the spheres serve as an interface. We relate to them first as specific structures, number, then they tell a story of the divine, then they tell even a deeper story that goes even beyond the story that is the divine, that's beyond structure. And then he explained that in Keser, you also have these 3 similar. One that relates to existence in the transcendent, because the spheres are immanent energy. The Esser spheres is immanent, Pnimi. Then the Makif, you also have 3. There's transcendent that relates to existence, that's Arich, Chetzenius Keser. You have a middle level, which is the either Pnimius Keser, Chetzenius Atik maybe, or a deeper level in Arich, which is more the transcendence on its own. And then you have the third level that's completely beyond Atik, Pnimius Atik, which also has that. And this also corresponds to the 3 meals on Shabbos and to 3 levels that we've been talking about here as well. If you recall, I talked before about we talked about the Tov, and he said the 5 Hu, the level of Hu, is first Avram. Hu Avram is really the revealing of Keser into existence, transcendence, and then the Eibishter's Hu is even higher than that. That's the 3rd level. So you have Mamala, Sovev, and Etzem, which was the beginning of this whole discussion, began with that on page 1411. So we're going to get back to the 3 levels of Ava, B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Maidecha, is these 3 dimensions. B'chol Levavcha is like, with all your heart, is like the divine within existence. B'chol Nafshecha, we learned, is Mesiras Nefesh, but it's the Hu, Bina. So it's transcendent, but not completely beyond. And then there's the Hu that's completely beyond. Now, in Lifnei Tzimtzum, you also have these 3. There's Aleis HaRatzon, where God desires, and now you already have envisioning the spheres. You have Kaidem Aleis HaRatzon, Shmei HaGadol, not specific names, it's just a general one name. And then there's a level that's even higher than that, the Etzem, that's beyond even Shmei HaGadol. But so it all comes together in the big picture, the small picture. Just wanted to lay that out. We're going to talk more about this. I just wanted to connect the dots here. Any questions?
Rabbi,
Yes.
in the Tanya, I believe the Alter Rebbe talks about Sefirot Ein Ketz. There's an infinite number of Sefirot, and in number and in extent. I'm wondering, how does that fit in here to the discussion? Does it fit in somewhere?
Yeah, it does fit in. That's a level where you already have the concept of spheres, but they're like the artist can do infinite possibilities. And then after that will come the level that he will choose the 10 out of the infinite possibilities. So sphere of St. Ketz literally means unlimited spheres. But then God will choose 10, and then he will create existence with the 10 spheres. So the sphere of St. Ketz is usually the level you want to associate it here could be Shmoi HaGadol. It could be even in the level of the names themselves, the infinite possibilities. And then there comes a point where it becomes 10. But he doesn't break it down with that here because it's not relevant that much to talk about the infinite possibilities. But if you want to bring that in, it fits right into the picture. But remember, there's a level that's even higher than Sefiros St. Ketz, where there's no Sefiros altogether. That there's altogether no possibilities. Not yet even, an artist can create infinite type of images and art. But there's a level before that that's not even yet that level. So that's where it would fit.
Rabbi, with the Sefiros Ein Ketz, would they each have their own name?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I don't know if it's discussed anywhere.
Is it possible that the 10 final ones that Hashem goes with, could they be made from the Sefirot Ein Ketz?
They are made from that because they are part of that. The infinite possibilities also includes the 10.
But for each of those, it includes the 10. The 10 are not made from the infinite. They're just one. They're just part of the 10.
Since it's one God, so you could imagine the 10 probably have within them somewhere they're rooted. When an artist creates one piece of art, that one piece of art is an expression of all his possibilities. He just chooses now to express it this way. So you have to say there is an element of infinity in the 10 spheres as well. But it's that's the answer.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
There's a fascinating discussion today, really fascinating. But a couple questions. Why, if we're learning today that the Esser Sefiros HaGenuzos is not really Sefirot, why does Chassidus use that term for it? Why wouldn't it use the Koach of Esser Sefiros or something like that? Why would it refer to that? Seems to me a little, what we learn now as a Chiddush to me, that it seems like it's a misnomer in a sense, what the Rebbe seems to be explaining. So I'm asking, curious why that was. Why would that be?
First of all, who says what Esser Sefiros HaGenuzos means? Esser Sefiros HaGenuzos can simply mean 10 potential spheres. Doesn't mean they're existing spheres. There's many ways to interpret that word in Hebrew. When it says
Koach,
when Kabbalah speaks about Esser Sefiros HaGenuzos, it's different. As I said, there are different places talk about this. They place the Esser Sefiros HaGenuzos in different places. So there's a general statement, the 10 hidden spheres in the Zohar. We don't when we initially read it, you don't know where they are and what form they're in. You just know they're called 10 hidden spheres. Then as you start explaining it in different places, there are places where they're actually spheres, but they're like concealed, like in Chechenis HaKeser. And the Chassidus comes in as Machadish that the root of them is in before the Tzimtzum, but they're not spheres. And Gnuzis is what the focus there is that the focus there is on the potential. And that's what it means. It's just a way of, just because you didn't hear about it doesn't mean it can't be interpreted that way. That's how I would explain it then.
I see. It would seem like it would say Koach.
No, it doesn't seem anything. It's not correct. The word 10 hidden spheres can mean many things. It can mean, doesn't mean they're spheres. It can mean what the word Gnuzis tells you, maybe that they're not spheres. They're just the root of the spheres. You can interpret it that way. I'll take it a step further. The Sefer Yetzirah says, Esser Sefiros bli ma. 10 spheres without substance. What does that mean? Is that spheres or not spheres? So you have to remember, even the 10 spheres that are gluyos are sometimes called without substance, because we're not talking about tangible entities here. So it all comes down to relative interpretations based on what level we're at. If you go back to, I was going to refer to it, in the Maimer V'Sfartem Lechem, which is in the volume 2, talks at length about the spheres. So there he brings an expression from Kabbalah that says, Ein mitzias lignuzes. So there's in Kabbalah, it talks about that the gnuzes, the hidden spheres, have no substance. So there's clearly interpretation in Kabbalah where Esses Spheres Agnuzis is simply saying we're using Esses Spheres, what's called B'Shem HaMushal. It's just a borrowed name. It's only because we want to have something to hold on to, but there's actually no substance at all. So some people interpret Esses Spheres Agnuzis as not existent altogether. In some way, like the Shemus, like potential. So there's a lot of discussion. Even in the Esses Spheres of Atzilus, there are Kabbalists that say that they don't really exist. They only exist when God uses them. There's no existence of spheres. When God chooses to be chesed, so then chesed becomes a reality. Stidis and many other Kabbalists don't go by that interpretation. So there's so much on this topic that you won't believe. This is a topic that's been discussed for literally thousands of years by the Kabbalists, what the nature of the spheres are. So you have to remember that when you start talking about these abstract levels, none of them are physical. So when you talk about something that's abstract, compared to the spheres of Bria, you can call the spheres of Atzilus no substance, because they're just energy, or even higher than just energy, maybe just divine. So if you really want to break it down, the challenge is the other way around. What really is a sphere? What exactly is it? And I think each of us has to figure out where we stand. Not everybody has got to the level of abstraction to understand what they are. Before the Tzimtzum, remember, there nothing exists, period. So what does it even mean to say? So the Alter Rebbe is trying to give us a little logical taste by giving the example of Shemus, that when you call something by name, it's not quite there, but it's already giving the potential for something. At the end of the day, all of this is an exercise, is teaching us how to be mamchish, how to somewhat come to appreciate and integrate godliness in our lives. But godliness in its purest form doesn't have any shape and form. So at the end of the day, you have to figure out how you understand the spheres and then how you understand one level or the other. This is not going to be understood like biology or chemistry. Even there's abstractions. When you talk about subatomic particles, for example, things that don't have tangible definitions. So here it's even more so, even more than quantum. When you're talking about states, quantum mechanics, you talk about states of probability. States, indeterministic states. What's an indeterministic state? In the state of probability, physicists talk about there's no substance because it's still probability. It's not a wave nor a particle. And that's in the physical existence. Imagine you're talking now on spiritual levels, how abstract it becomes. So it really comes down to how we understand each in our own way these levels. What is it? So I can tell you that those that understand Chassidus really well, what you would call hidden sphere, by them is a revealed sphere. So it all comes down to how we each of us understand it.
That was going to lead what you just said to my second question about probability and quantum mechanics. That this, by saying the Esses Spheres of Genuzas within Tzimtzum are just potentials, isn't that corresponds similar, so to speak, to quantum mechanics, that depending on how you measure something, you can actually affect change its revelation, its manifestation? Wouldn't that be something?
I intentionally brought it for that reason, because there's some things that I would say like this, and quantum mechanics is juvenile compared to this, because quantum mechanics is a way that we can explain this, but this is even much deeper and higher, because in quantum mechanics is still part of physical reality. It's just called probability. Here's what we're talking about before the Tzimtzum. Nothing was created even here. This is all within the divine. But yes, you could use probability as an example to understand Shemus here. That's correct. But remember, when you learn Chassidus, you're constantly looking to find deeper and deeper ways of experiencing the divine. So quantum mechanics is a good beginning to get from a state of definition to a state of probability. But then when you start going even further, it's even more than remember, probability itself has probability of probability and probability of probability of probability, if you know what I mean. So the truth is, we're going here, Chassidus, it goes deeper and deeper because you're going to the highest levels of the creator himself. But yes, bottom line is quantum mechanics can be used to understand a distinction between definitions and probable definitions, if you want to put it that way. Okay?
Yeah, thank you. Very nice. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Rabbi, is it time
Yes.
for one more question?
Go ahead. I'm stopping here anyway. Yes, go ahead.
Is there a difference between praising the great name of Hashem and calling upon it?
I'm sure there is, but I would wait till he finishes the topic, and then it'll be easier to talk about, because he hasn't gotten back yet to the calling of the name, like he said, Amin Yehishmei Rabbah, or what he said before, someone who extends or prolongs saying Echad. We're going to talk about some of that. I think it'll be more appropriate to then discuss how we associate, because we listen every day we daven, all our prayers, we're constantly talking about God's Shmoi, the name of God, the name of God. Well, this piece in Ayin Beis is going to give tremendous insight and enlighten us of what does it mean when we say the name of God.
Yeah.
And we praise that name of God and we call that name of God. But he's still in the middle of it, but we're going to absolutely discuss this. This is the next few pages. That's a discussion here. Because at the end of the day, the names are there for us to be able to relate the different shemis and so on. Yeah.
This is big. This seems tremendously big. big.
Absolutely. If you remember, the whole thing began, we spoke of the two Maimar Chazal, that anyone who answers Amin Yeshmei Rabbah with all his might, he abolishes judgments and severities. And the second one, Kol HaMayrich BeEchad, anyone who prolongs the saying of Echad and Shema, so his life, his years and his days and years will be prolonged. He's coming to explain, those are the Chazal that he's explaining. So he's actually directly talking about prayers that we say and what they really mean. So we're now in the process of understanding what the mean Shema is. As we get to understand, he's going to come back and explain those Chazal, which are also coming to really come to explain the whole process of how we draw down from the highest levels of the divine into existence. Listen, when you say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, right? How many times do we say that? 100 blessings a day. What does that mean? Anybody think about it? We say it lip service. You know, Baruch, God is the God, the King of the world, is blessed. Shahakol niyeh b'dvari, because everything was created by His words. Or Hamoitzi lechem min haaretz, or Beirei pri hamezenis, Beirei pri adama, Beirei pri ha'etz, etc. Beirei pri ha'gofen. But if you think about it, Baruch means to draw. Hamshacha, Baruch Atah. Blessed are you is not just a praise; it's also you drawing down Hashem Elokeinu, Melech HaOlam. Every one of those names, Hashem, Elokeinu, Melech, Ha'olam, all have significance. And you're drawing it down into Lechem Min Haaretz, into the bread in this ground. So you're basically integrating and interfacing between existence and the divine. And in this context, the highest levels of the divine, because bread is part of the art that God created. That's part of the structure. But you want to connect the structure to that which is beyond the structure. And you'll soon be seeing that the letters that God used to create existence, Dibur, are rooted in the letters that He thought about existence, that are rooted in the Rotzen and Tainug, the desire and pleasure within existence that he had, which is rooted all the way in the Etzem Ha'or that we're talking about now before the Tzimtzum. So when you make that blessing on a piece of bread, you're drawing not just from the divine that is energizing the grain that grows in our fields, but you're drawing all the way from God, envisioning it all to the highest levels that are beyond even the name. But you have to draw down in a structured way, so that's why we draw it through the names. This, if you want to get a little preview, is essentially what this is coming to explain, which is the process of every blessing and every prayer, every mitzvah, everything we do is this avodah. we're making a dir b'tachtenim. We're drawing godliness into existence. But he wants to explain we're drawing the highest levels of godliness that is even beyond the structure. And that's why you need all these different stages. And in a way, every blessing, all those names, Baruch Havaya, Elokeinu, what do you, Hashem Elokeinu? It's not synonymous. Hashem is one level, Elokeinu is another level, Melech HaElam is another level. Right there you see three levels. Havaya, Elokeinu, Melech HaElam. Hashem Elokeinu, Melech HaElam. So this will all become pretty clear as we go further. But this is what Chassidus is at its best.
So, Rabbi, sorry again. So the rabbi now is saying that besides calling upon the name and praising the name, now we bless the name. We're actually blessing the name. Is this like a third way to interact or with the great name?
I'd rather not go into that right now because it's a little out of the scope of what he's discussing. Let's see how we can explain it. Then we can discuss that.
Maybe later.
I'm not saying it isn't a legitimate discussion. I'm just saying it's not exactly the theme right now. It's going, but let I try to focus what we're learning, and then we'll see what we can derive from that.
Exactly. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure I get it right.
No, I understand. It's very exciting. It's a whole, when you learn this,
very
you suddenly
exciting
realize the blessings are a whole nother reality. They're not just
it's very exciting. Holy schmagolis.
Okay.
Wow.
Join the club. We're all in a state of rotze here in this class. Rotze. Just keep yourself grounded. Don't still have to do a Seder for Pesach.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay, so we'll stop here.
He's going back about brochas to page Aleph Tov, 1400. He starts the paragraph, the brocha b'chinas yichud ha'elah. Over there, he goes into more details about the brocha.
Yeah, that's correct. Good point. That's
1400?
Right. Yeah, 1400. Brocha.
How do I get to that?
What do you have what are you looking at?
I'm just looking at I'm on the link that somehow.
Just go earlier. You'll find that you just go back a bunch of pages. You have to go back around 20 pages.
Okay.
Yeah. The bracha, by the way, is there, but also later as well, I think. Let me see. Yeah. Right, the brachas, because the brachas that the Sanhedrin. Good point, very good point. Okay, let's stop here. Where am I stopping? Halfway down, approximately on page 14. Well, a little more than halfway down. Okay. 1420.